Racist cop hits black woman, then discovers she's his boss. A single moment can shatter a lifetime of illusions. Officer Thomas Harding never anticipated that his impulsive burst of violence, fueled by deeply ingrained prejudice, would change his life forever. When he struck a mysterious black woman on a dimly lit Philadelphia street, he had no idea she was the new leader poised to command the entire district. He thought he was in control, respected, feared, and above the consequences of his own bigotry. But the shock of discovering she was, in fact, his boss would spin him into a web of scandal, remorse, and searing karma that no one saw coming. Philadelphia has a rhythm all its own. Between the iconic statue of William Penn atop City Hall and the roaring fervor of Eagles fans at Lincoln Financial Field, you can feel the city's heart beating in every worn-out sidewalk crack. It's in the hush of dawn, near the Schuylkill River, where runners chase the sunrise, and in the bustling crowds at Reading Terminal Market, where the clash of voices and aromas from every corner of the globe merge into something distinctly Philly. This city's tapestry is woven from equal strands of grit, history, pride, and community, an intricate pattern that offers hope to some and heartbreak to others. Officer Thomas Harding liked to think he knew Philadelphia intimately, inside and out. A proud son of South Philly, he'd grown up on corners overshadowed by row homes with chipped paint and stoops where neighbors would sit for hours, gossiping, laughing, and sometimes bickering over the next game. His father had been a Philadelphia police officer, before him a man who wore his uniform like it was a cloak of invincibility. The stories from his father's days on the force were epic poems of heroism, but also sometimes laced with unsavory undertones. According to his father, criminals came in all shapes and sizes, but you had to watch out for some groups more than others. Over the years, Thomas absorbed that worldview without questioning it too deeply. When Thomas graduated from the police academy, he was assigned to the 17th District, near Point Breeze. This was a neighborhood undergoing rapid change, old row houses turning into sleek, expensive units for young professionals, while long-time residents struggled not to be priced out. It was a melting pot of cultures and tensions, a place that required not just brute force, but also understanding. Though the academy had stressed the importance of community policing and bridging gaps, Thomas Harding clung to the simplified worldview his father had instilled in him. There were good citizens, and then there were troublemakers. And too often, in Thomas's eyes, those troublemakers had a certain look, skin tone, clothing style, even speech patterns that he had learned to associate with criminality. Still, Thomas's early years on the force had been relatively unremarkable. He was good at paperwork, punctual with deadlines, and rarely challenged superiors. He had married young Rachel, a schoolteacher from the same neighborhood, and had one daughter, Lily, who was the apple of his eye. His colleagues saw him as a family man, someone who lived for barbecues and Sunday football. But beneath that wholesome exterior lurked a resentment, an anger that festered in fleeting remarks, in a skeptical glance at certain citizens, in harsh words that he reserved for those he deemed less worthy of respect. He was never overt enough to raise official eyebrows, no explicit slurs in public, no official complaints of harassment. Instead, Thomas's prejudice showed up in subtle ways: random car stops, an overzealous approach when dealing with black teenagers, a readiness to escalate minor issues into more intense confrontations. He felt justified. He believed he was cleaning up the streets so that hard-working folks could feel safe. His partner, Officer Mike Alvarez, was aware of Thomas's leanings, but Mike often avoided conflict. Mike was a steady, soft-spoken man with Puerto Rican heritage who prided himself on engaging the community more gently. He sometimes tried to check Thomas's behavior with small remarks, but rarely pushed the issue. The Philadelphia PD was a mixed bag. There were officers from all backgrounds. Some openly condemned prejudice, some were neutral or indifferent, and a few quietly harbored dangerous biases. The internal culture, with its camaraderie, jokes, and watch-your-back environment, allowed certain attitudes to slip by if they weren't too blatant. Unbeknownst to most of the rank-and-file officers, a big shift was about to happen at the top. Commissioner David Holloway, nearing retirement, had been grooming a successor to take the reins of the police department. Rumors floated around precincts, often focusing on a new star from outside Philadelphia's own circles, someone with a stellar track record, advanced degrees in criminology, and a proven commitment to community outreach in high-crime neighborhoods. That person was Cynthia Braxton, a 38-year-old black woman from Chicago. She'd started in the Chicago PD, working her way up from patrol officer to detective, then to an administrative role where she spearheaded a successful youth mentorship program aimed at reducing gun violence in the city's toughest neighborhoods. Her leadership style was both firm and empathetic, and she had proven herself in crisis after crisis. Commissioner Holloway had taken note. With Chicago's blessings, he extended her an invitation to join Philadelphia PD as a deputy commissioner with the potential to assume the full role within a year. The official announcement was still under wraps. A few top brass knew, but the general rank and file had only heard whispers of some outsider. Within a few weeks, Deputy Commissioner Braxton would formally join the team. She planned to visit multiple precincts incognito, watch the daily operations, learn the local culture, and gather insights on how to address Philadelphia's unique challenges. She arrived in Philly a week earlier than scheduled and decided to blend in before making her official introduction. Street-level perspective, in her view, was crucial. You can't fix a community you haven't walked through yourself. It was a muggy summer evening when it all began to unravel. Thomas Harding was patrolling a moderately busy street in South Philly with Mike Alvarez. They'd had a long day, 2 domestic disputes, a minor drug bust, and a call about a lost child. Tension already weighed on Thomas's shoulders. He'd gotten into an argument with Rachel that morning, something about him coming home too late and ignoring Lily's dance recital. He despised feeling guilt at home. It made him more irritable on the job. As they drove past a row of shuttered businesses, Thomas noticed a young black man lingering outside a convenience store. The man was simply leaning against the wall, scrolling on his phone, but something about him rubbed Thomas the wrong way. "Let's just do a quick check," Thomas said, turning on the cruiser's spotlight to illuminate the man. Mike sighed. "We haven't had any calls. He's not bothering anyone." Thomas shrugged. "I just want to make sure everything's good." He stepped out of the cruiser, ignoring Mike's reluctance. The man cooperated, slightly bemused, but not confrontational. Thomas asked him a few questions. "Where do you live? Why are you here?" The man answered calmly that he was waiting for a friend to pick him up. "All right, just be mindful of the loitering laws," Thomas said curtly, as if he were issuing a final warning. Mike gave the man an apologetic nod before they got back into the cruiser. They drove off, leaving a tense silence in their wake. Mike tried to break the mood. "You got to stop that man. You know how it looks." Thomas frowned. "I'm just doing my job." "Sure," Mike replied, not pushing further. A few blocks later, they noticed a figure standing at a corner under a flickering street lamp. The figure was turned slightly away, checking a smartphone. From the silhouette, Thomas assumed it was a woman, dressed in casual slacks and a dark jacket. She looked composed, maybe in her late 30s or early 40s, but it was hard to tell from a distance. She wasn't near any open businesses, and it was nearing 11 p.m. Thomas's intuition, though shaped by prejudices, lit up again. "That's suspicious," he muttered under his breath. "We keep seeing random folks out here at night. Something's up." Without waiting for Mike's response, he parked the cruiser along the curb and stepped out. Officer Harding approached the woman, who turned slightly when she noticed him. From the glow of the street lamp and the reflection of passing cars, he caught a better look. She was indeed a black woman, her natural hair styled in neat twists that framed her face. She carried herself with a confident posture, and her expression was calm, but a little curious. She wore no visible ID or badge, just a simple outfit with practical shoes and a leather bag slung over her shoulder. "Good evening, ma'am," Thomas said, shining a flashlight toward her face, enough to obscure her sight with bright glare. "Can I ask what you're doing out here?" The woman raised a hand slightly to shield her eyes. "I'm checking directions," she said politely. "I'm new to the area." Thomas nodded with a tight smile. "A little late to be wandering around, don't you think?" She took a breath. "I was at a meeting earlier and decided to walk back to my car. My phone's map app kept redirecting me." She offered a slight smile, hoping to diffuse any tension. At that moment, Mike Alvarez stepped up behind Thomas, trying to appear less confrontational. "You all right, ma'am? Did you get lost?" She nodded. "I'm fine, thanks. Just need to figure out which way is Broad Street. The GPS is being glitchy tonight." "Broad is that way," Mike said, pointing. "About 4 blocks. Are you parked near City Hall?" She nodded again. "Yes, near the Masonic Temple," she said with a small chuckle. "I keep thinking I'm heading the right way, then I turn a corner and end up somewhere else." Mike finished for her. He offered a friendly grin. Thomas, however, was not satisfied. He aimed his flashlight lower, noticing a bulge in her jacket pocket. "What's that?" he demanded. The woman looked down, then calmly reached in to pull out her wallet. "Just my wallet and phone," she explained. She made sure to move slowly, aware that a sudden gesture could be misread. Thomas's suspicion heightened. Something about her well-spoken manner, or perhaps the fact that she seemed so poised despite being questioned, rubbed him the wrong way. He often expected people on these streets, especially at night, to be either jittery or angry if they were innocent. Her calmness felt to him like an act. "Let me see some ID," he ordered. She blinked in mild surprise but complied, handing over a driver's license from Illinois. "Cynthia Braxton," Thomas read aloud. She offered a small nod. "That's me," she replied. "I've only been in Philadelphia for about a week, so my license is still from out of state." Mike glanced over. "Miss Braxton, everything's fine. Just be careful around here at night. If you get lost again, you might want to call a cab or use a rideshare service for safety." She appreciated Mike's concern. "Thank you, officer. The first should be okay, though. I really do want to learn my way around." Thomas, handing back her license, couldn't help but press. "Why Philadelphia?" he asked. "Work?" "Yes, work," she answered evenly. "What line of work?" Cynthia didn't want to reveal she was the soon-to-be deputy commissioner, especially not in an unplanned situation like this. She merely said, "I'm in law enforcement, transferred here for a position." Thomas arched an eyebrow, his skepticism deepening. "Oh yeah, you a parole officer or something?" She didn't flinch. "No, a bit higher up," she said calmly, her tone still measured. Mike offered a diplomatic nod. "Welcome to Philly, then. Good luck with everything." Sensing the conversation nearing a natural end, Cynthia started to turn away. "Thanks for the directions. I'll head to my car now." Thomas, however, took a half step forward, as though not entirely willing to let her leave. "Hold on," he said abruptly. "We're not done here." Her body stiffened. "Is there a problem, officer?" Thomas's voice grew sharper. "I need to check your bag. People carry all sorts of contraband around here. I want to be sure you're not carrying anything illegal." "I'm not carrying anything illegal," she replied, her voice still calm, though a bit firmer now. "And I don't consent to a search without cause." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "You're refusing a lawful request?" Mike looked uneasy, glancing at Thomas. "We don't have probable cause, partner." Thomas ignored him, focusing on Cynthia. "You said you're from out of town," he pressed, "that you're with law enforcement. Then show me some official credentials." Cynthia hesitated. She did have credentials from her past roles, but they identified her position in a manner she wasn't ready to disclose. She also knew her rights, and that this search demand was crossing a line. With quiet resolve, she repeated, "I'm not consenting to a search. If you wish to see my official credentials, you can contact your chain of command." Thomas bristled at her mention of chain of command. "You think you can just talk back to me? This is my district. If you've got nothing to hide, open the bag." Mike cleared his throat nervously, noticing this was escalating. "Tom, let's back off. She said she works in law enforcement." Thomas whirled on him. "She could be lying. For all we know, she's carrying a weapon or narcotics. I've seen this play out before." Cynthia put a hand out, a subtle gesture for calm. "Officer, the first respect your position, but you have no grounds to detain me." The mention of grounds and detain ignited a spark in Thomas. It was as if an alarm went off in his head. "She's telling me how to do my job," he thought. He felt disrespected, challenged, and that old resentment flared. His father's voice in the back of his mind, "Don't let them tell you what you can and can't do." Things happened quickly. In a moment of anger, Thomas reached out and grabbed Cynthia's forearm with more force than necessary. She recoiled, alarmed. "Hey!" she exclaimed, her voice rising. "What are you doing? Let go!" "Officer!" Mike shouted, stepping forward to intervene. "Thomas, you're out of line!" Cynthia tried to pull free. "I am not resisting. Let go of me," she repeated. Thomas's adrenaline spiked, twisting his perspective. The more she insisted, the more he felt justified. He could see her face turning furious, but he spun it in his mind as aggression. With the hand that wasn't holding her forearm, he jabbed forward, pushing her back to gain control. His palm struck her shoulder and grazed her face in the process. She stumbled, letting out a pained grunt as she nearly lost her balance. "Thomas, stop!" Mike yelled, physically placing himself between them. Thomas felt his chest heaving. Cynthia's bag had fallen to the ground, her phone skittering across the pavement. Lights from passing cars illuminated the shock and anger on her face, and even in that moment, a part of Thomas registered that he might have done something very, very wrong. Before anyone could utter another word, a black SUV rounded the corner and pulled up alongside the scene. The passenger side window rolled down, revealing a suited man with a badge clipped prominently to his belt. "Deputy Commissioner," he shouted, concern lacing his tone. Mike froze. "Deputy? What?" Thomas's eyes flicked to the SUV, then to Cynthia, and a surge of dread washed over him. No, this can't be. The man in the SUV stepped out hastily. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an official Philadelphia PD identification lanyard. He hurried to Cynthia's side, stooping to pick up her phone and bag. "Are you okay, Mom?" he asked anxiously. He glanced from Cynthia to Thomas, alarmed. Cynthia took a moment to straighten her jacket and regulate her breathing. Then she looked at Thomas with a gaze so piercing that he felt his stomach churn. "I'm all right, Captain," she said to the man who'd just arrived, "but we have a problem here." Mike's mouth hung open. He pieced it together. The woman they had just hassled Thomas had manhandled was none other than Deputy Commissioner Cynthia Braxton, the new head official set to take a top post in the Philadelphia PD. "Oh, God," Mike murmured, stepping back, his eyes darting between Thomas and Cynthia. Thomas felt his heart pound in his ears. The color drained from his face. He had just assaulted his soon-to-be boss, a woman with authority over the entire department. The captain, a gruff man named Samuel Rogers, turned a cold glare on Thomas. "Officer, do you realize what you've just done?" Thomas's mind buzzed with panic. Every fiber of him wanted to stammer an apology, to find a justification, but no words came out. He just stood there, fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Deputy Commissioner Braxton took a calming breath. Her jacket was slightly rumpled, and a faint red mark on her cheek from where his hand had grazed. Her stood out under the street lamp. "Officer Harding," she said slowly, reading his name tag, "I believe we need to discuss your methods of community policing." The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind. Captain Rogers insisted on escorting Deputy Commissioner Braxton to safety. Mike Alvarez tried to stammer out apologies. Thomas Harding was left standing on the sidewalk, feeling numb. He sensed the stares from passers-by who had begun to gather once they realized something big was happening. Lights from phone cameras flickered in the periphery. Within the hour, the incident reached the desk of Commissioner Holloway himself. Over the next few days, Thomas was placed on administrative leave while Internal Affairs launched an investigation. The new Deputy Commissioner Braxton, who had been planning a gradual introduction to the department, found herself thrust into the spotlight. Word spread quickly among officers. Some were outraged on her behalf, others stunned by Thomas's stupidity, and a few quietly criticized the department's lack of oversight for letting such an officer fester in the ranks for so long. Meanwhile, news outlets picked up the story. Though official details were sparse, rumors began circulating about a racist incident involving a high-ranking black official in the Philadelphia PD. Online, the speculation ran wild. Some insisted Thomas Harding was being unfairly vilified, while others demanded his immediate termination and legal charges. Old acquaintances from the neighborhood recognized his face on social media posts, intensifying the scrutiny. Thomas's wife, Rachel, was mortified. She had heard about it from a friend before Thomas called her. "What on earth have you done?" she hissed into the phone, tears in her voice. Lily, their daughter, was too young to fully grasp the magnitude, but sensed the tension in the household. Thomas retreated into himself, swinging between anger, fear, and disbelief. He raged at the system for letting a nobody from Chicago waltz into Philadelphia with so much power. Then he trembled at the possibility of losing his job, or even facing charges. His father's voice echoed in his mind. "You can't trust them. Protect yourself." But how could he protect himself from the unstoppable wave that was Deputy Commissioner Braxton's rightful fury? While Thomas stewed at home, Deputy Commissioner Cynthia Braxton dove into her new role. She had bruises on her arm and a faint mark on her cheek to remind her of that night. But she wasn't one to remain a victim. She was determined to address the broader issues within the force. Originally from a middle-class neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, Cynthia had grown up with police officers who too often overlooked or mistreated her community. One incident in her teenage years, her older brother being falsely detained, sparked her desire to become part of the force that was supposed to protect, not oppress. Through years of diligence, Cynthia graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in criminal justice. She joined the Chicago PD, rising through the ranks by combining strong investigative skills with empathy for the communities she served. She earned a master's in public policy and became a prominent figure in advocating for police reform, accountability, and community engagement. That track record caught Commissioner Holloway's eye. He needed someone to help Philadelphia PD evolve into a more transparent, community-focused entity. When he met Cynthia, he recognized both her passion and her toughness. She came highly recommended by her Chicago superiors, and the city's leadership in Philadelphia welcomed the fresh perspective she brought. But no one, least of all Cynthia, expected such a stark demonstration of the department's deep-seated problems on her very first night exploring the city. The confrontation with Officer Harding was a microcosm of an issue that plagued law enforcement across the country: the intersection of power, prejudice, and a lack of accountability. Now, she found herself embroiled in a public scandal before she could even set foot in her new office. Despite the turmoil, Cynthia remained poised. In an internal memo, she acknowledged the incident but did not offer details, promising a thorough and fair investigation. She also emphasized her commitment to ensuring that all officers, regardless of seniority or personal biases, would be held to the highest standard of conduct. Lieutenant Andrea Parker from Internal Affairs was assigned to the case. A fair, meticulous investigator, Parker had overseen everything from misconduct allegations to corruption probes. She and her small team interviewed Thomas Harding, Mike Alvarez, Cynthia Braxton, and Captain Rogers. They also collected video footage from city surveillance cameras, local businesses, and bystanders who had recorded the altercation on their phones. Thomas dreaded his interview. He walked into the Internal Affairs office with sweat beading on his forehead. Lieutenant Parker sat behind a desk in a sterile conference room, her hands folded. A small recording device blinked on the tabletop. Thomas tried to offer a sanitized version of events, that he'd been concerned for public safety, that the woman had refused to comply with an officer's orders. Parker let him speak without interruption, only occasionally pressing for clarification. He attempted to paint his actions as a necessary use of force. When Parker asked, "Why did you suspect Miss Braxton in particular?" Thomas floundered. He cited unfamiliar face, suspicious behavior, and the late hour. Parker's expression remained neutral, but her silence demanded more. Thomas finally mumbled something about just having a hunch. Lieutenant Parker tapped a file in front of her. Officer Alvarez stated that Miss Braxton gave clear, reasonable answers about being lost and that no probable cause was established. Could you explain why you still felt the need to physically restrain her? Thomas's ears burned. He could almost hear the sound of the departmental walls closing in. "She refused a bag search," he said defensively, "and I thought she might be concealing a weapon or drugs." "Based on what evidence?" Parker asked. Thomas had no good answer. He stammered a vague line about experience and intuition. When Parker finished, Thomas felt like the noose had tightened. He saw the lines on her notepad, some quotes verbatim, others likely cross-referenced with policy. He left the interview shaken, knowing the path ahead looked bleak. Suspended from duty, Thomas had too much time on his hands. Rachel avoided talking to him beyond the bare minimum required to manage the household and care for Lily. Friends from the neighborhood were split. Some offered support out of old loyalties, while others quietly distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with him in this fiasco. At first, Thomas stayed glued to the news, social media, and police forums, seeking any flicker of defense in the public sphere. He found a few voices claiming the media is always out to get the cops, or they're making him a scapegoat because of politics. But these were drowned out by countless others condemning him. He assaulted a black woman for no reason. This is why we say the system is broken. He's the face of police brutality. His father, now retired and bitter, called one evening to check in. "Son, I told you the job ain't what it used to be," he grumbled. "They don't back you up anymore. Now you're left out to dry." Thomas almost felt comforted, but he also felt a flicker of doubt. His father's brand of cynicism had shaped his worldview, but was it right? Or had it just led him down a path of prejudice and brutality? The dissonance was eating at him. Sleep came in fits. Nightmares replayed. The moment he lashed out at Cynthia Braxton, her face contorted in shock. The immediate regret that flared in his mind, but was too late to quell his violence. He woke up drenched in sweat, hating himself, and yet still burning with anger. Meanwhile, Cynthia Braxton didn't relish punishing Thomas Harding specifically. She wanted a broader, systematic change. She requested a series of meetings with Commissioner Holloway to present a plan for reviewing protocols on stops, searches, and the use of force. She recommended mandatory implicit bias training, community outreach programs, and improved disciplinary measures for officers found guilty of misconduct. She also pushed for more robust support for mental health programs, both for officers and community members. Philadelphia is a city of strong neighborhoods, Cynthia said to Holloway and other department heads at a high-level meeting. If we lose the trust of these neighborhoods, we're failing in our mission to protect and serve. The meeting was tense. Some older officials rolled their eyes, seeing her as an outsider with lofty ideals. But Commissioner Holloway was on her side, and many younger officers, especially those from diverse backgrounds, felt emboldened by her stance. "You have my full backing," Holloway told her. "Don't let the old guard intimidate you." Still, there was an undercurrent of resentment from certain corners of the department. Thomas's supporters, or those who feared big changes. Cynthia knew the path forward would be fraught with internal resistance, but her resolve was unshaken. She was determined to show that accountability wasn't just about punishing scapegoats. It was about creating a healthier department and safer communities. One afternoon, Mike Alvarez knocked on the door to Cynthia's temporary office. She had yet to move into her official space, still using a smaller conference room as her base of operations. "Ma'am," he greeted, standing stiffly by the door. "Officer Alvarez," she said, glancing up from her laptop. "Come in." He stepped inside, removing his cap. I just wanted to apologize again for what happened." She studied him for a moment. "I appreciate that. You didn't strike me, though." Mike nodded, his face taut with guilt. "But I didn't stop it soon enough. I knew Thomas was going too far, and I hesitated." Cynthia leaned back in her chair, letting a silence linger. "Why did you hesitate?" Mike exhaled slowly, gathering his thoughts. "Thomas is my partner. We ride together every day. There's this unwritten rule not to undermine your partner in front of civilians. But I realize now that staying silent was a form of complicity." Cynthia's gaze softened slightly. "I understand that pressure. I do. But we have to break those unwritten rules if they allow injustices to happen." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. That's why I'm here. I'm willing to testify, to support whatever reforms you're advocating for." This incident, it shook me up, made me question a lot of things. I want to do better. Cynthia offered a faint smile. "I'm glad to hear that, Officer Alvarez. Your testimony is crucial, and your willingness to self-reflect is exactly what we need more of in this department." Mike left feeling a mix of relief and lingering guilt, but also a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't want to be part of the problem anymore. After weeks of investigation, a disciplinary hearing was scheduled. Thomas Harding was charged with excessive use of force and conduct unbecoming an officer. The hearing took place in a solemn meeting room at police headquarters, with brass nameplates set before a long table where the department's disciplinary review board sat. Thomas had retained a union-appointed lawyer who argued that Thomas acted within his training and that Miss Braxton's refusal to comply fueled the altercation. Video evidence, however, showed a calm Cynthia stating her rights and an agitated Thomas laying hands on her first without clear cause. Deputy Commissioner Braxton was present, but she let the facts speak for themselves. She recounted her own account with poise and clarity. Mike Alvarez also testified, contradicting Thomas's claim of feeling threatened. Mike stated that Cynthia had shown no sign of aggression and complied with all lawful instructions. On cross-examination, the union lawyer tried to paint Cynthia as uncooperative, but the footage and Mike's statements made that argument crumble. When asked why she didn't immediately present her deputy commissioner credentials, Cynthia explained she was off duty and had no obligation to present them unless there was a legitimate basis for the officer's suspicion. The board deliberated for a day before reconvening with their decision. Thomas Harding was found guilty of excessive force and recommended for immediate termination from the force. They also forwarded the case to the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges, such as simple assault and official oppression. The ruling sent shockwaves through the department. Some officers argued it was an overreaction, while others believed it was well past time for an example to be made of officers who abused their power. Thomas left the hearing in a daze, his world collapsing. The official termination of Officer Thomas Harding became headline news. Major outlets and local stations alike latched onto the story of a racist cop fired for striking a high-ranking black official. Community activists praised Deputy Commissioner Braxton's stand and demanded deeper reforms. Meanwhile, pockets of the police union expressed outrage, claiming Thomas was sacrificed to appease political pressures. Thomas retreated into a shell of anger and bitterness. His father visited him, patting him on the back and saying, "They did you wrong, son. They want to make an example out of you." But even that brought little comfort. At home, Rachel's patience had dried up. She saw how Thomas wasn't taking accountability. She recognized how his biases had always been there, in the small remarks, the jokes, the scornful ways he talked about certain members of the community. "You need help," she told him one evening. "Therapy, counseling, something. Because this hate is destroying you." Thomas just mumbled something about the system being rigged. Rachel stared at him with tears. "It's not rigged, Thomas. You made a choice, several choices that led you here. Our daughter is seeing her father unravel over this. Please get help." He didn't respond. Instead, he spent hours on internet forums, lapping up conspiracy theories about how minority communities want to tear down the police, fueling his anger. As if losing his job wasn't enough, the district attorney's office decided to press charges against Thomas. A subpoena arrived, compelling him to appear in court for arraignment on misdemeanor assault. If convicted, he faced fines and possibly up to a year in jail. Financial troubles soon followed. He was stripped of his badge, no longer had a steady income, and the union's legal assistance was limited. Rachel's teacher's salary wasn't enough to cover everything, especially with legal bills piling up. The house they owned in South Philly became a burden. The prospect of losing it loomed large. Former friends now avoided him, not wanting to be associated with a disgraced cop. The severance from the department was meager due to the circumstances of his firing. Late at night, Thomas found himself drinking too much, replaying that night on the street in his mind, searching for a scapegoat, a missed chance to do things differently. But every time he circled back to the ugly truth, he had chosen to assault a woman solely because of his bigoted assumptions. One afternoon, as he walked down the very street where the incident happened, a group of local teens recognized him. "Hey, that's that racist cop," one called out. Another sneered. "Not a cop anymore, jerk." They whipped out phones, mocking him, calling him a disgrace. Thomas felt his blood boil, but he was powerless. No badge to brandish, no authority to scare them away. He hurried off, shame burning hot on his cheeks. In contrast, Deputy Commissioner Braxton rapidly gained respect from community members, activists, and many officers alike. She conducted listening tours in different precincts, inviting residents to voice their concerns directly. She collaborated with local churches, youth groups, and non-profits, forging new partnerships between the police and the communities they served. Yet, she also faced pushback. A few old guard commanders subtly resisted her initiatives. Some politicians tried to use the Harding scandal to score points or to discredit her, claiming it was a PR stunt to fire one officer and tout that as reform. Still, Cynthia pressed forward. She launched a new training program at the academy called Serve with Dignity, focusing on de-escalation and implicit bias awareness. She set up a civilian oversight committee, giving citizens a clearer channel to address grievances. Slowly, cracks of skepticism softened, replaced by cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, Philadelphia PD could change. Months passed, and the day of Thomas Harding's assault trial arrived. It was a small, tense proceeding. The district attorney's office presented its case, showing the footage of Thomas grabbing and pushing Cynthia. Cynthia testified again, recounting how Thomas escalated the situation without cause. Her presence in the courtroom, wearing a crisp departmental uniform with a deputy commissioner's badge, underscored the seriousness of the case. Thomas's defense lawyer tried to spin the narrative of a simple misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for a few hours. They found Thomas Harding guilty of misdemeanor assault. The judge, wanting to send a message about abuse of power, sentenced Thomas to 4 months in county jail, plus probation and mandated counseling for anger management and racial bias. Thomas's legs nearly buckled as he heard the sentence. He glanced at Cynthia, who met his gaze for a fleeting moment. In her eyes, he didn't see triumph or malice, only a resolute sadness, as if she was disappointed he had thrown his career and life away so recklessly. County jail was an awakening. Thomas was separated from the general population for his own safety, given his status as a former police officer. But even in protective custody, he felt the utter loss of freedom, the suffocating routine, the shame of wearing an orange jumpsuit. He had time, endless hours, in a cramped cell to think about what had led him there. He had grown up idolizing the badge, carrying a legacy from his father. Yet that legacy was tainted by the inherent biases he never questioned. He realized his father's outlook on policing had shaped him into someone who viewed certain people with automatic suspicion. The kid leaning against the wall, the woman walking alone at night, he saw them as threats. Never neighbors or fellow human beings, just living their lives. When he wasn't being harassed by other inmates or dealing with the grim monotony, Thomas attended mandatory counseling sessions. The counselor, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Simone Carter, probed at his beliefs and forced him to confront them. "I see you're angry," she'd say, after he spat out some bitter remark about the system. "But let's dig into why. Are you angry at the system, or are you angry at yourself?" He hated those sessions at first, feeling cornered. But as the weeks trudged on, shame turned into a reluctant introspection. Step by step, he admitted to himself that he had let prejudice and rage override his better judgment. 4 months later, Thomas emerged from county jail, a thinner, more subdued man. The press coverage around his release was minimal, just a few local reporters. No warm welcome, no family or friends cheering him on. Rachel had filed for divorce while he was inside, unable to endure his spiral any longer. She took Lily to stay with her parents in a different neighborhood. He found himself alone, jobless, with limited money and a tarnished reputation that would follow him everywhere. With nowhere else to go, he rented a small, run-down apartment on the edge of town. As part of his probation, he continued mandatory counseling and community service. Ironically, his service hours placed him in a youth mentorship program run in part by the police department, one of the many expansions Deputy Commissioner Braxton had overseen. Every day, Thomas was confronted with kids from neighborhoods he used to patrol. Many were Black and Latino youths he'd once viewed as automatic suspects. Now, he was expected to guide them, share cautionary tales of how prejudice can destroy lives, both the victims and the perpetrators. It was humiliating, but also enlightening in a slow, painful way. Some of the kids recognized him from the news, others just saw a disgraced ex-cop forced to do community service. A few teased him, but others gradually asked him questions about police work, about how to interact with officers safely, about changing the system. One afternoon, while Thomas was arranging sports equipment for a community outreach event, He looked up and froze. Deputy Commissioner Braxton was there, stepping out of a department vehicle with a couple of aides. She was visiting the program to check on its progress and talk with the young participants. Thomas felt a rush of panic and shame. He kept his head down, hoping to avoid her notice. But eventually their eyes met. She stared for a moment, seemingly puzzled, then recognition dawned. She approached calmly. "Mr. Harding," she said, her voice not unkind but firm. He felt his throat go dry. "Deputy Commissioner," he managed, looking at the ground. She glanced around at the group of kids playing basketball. "So, you're here for community service?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, ma'am. Part of my probation." She paused, considering him. "How are you doing?" He almost laughed at the irony of the question. "Not great," he admitted. "But I'm trying to learn, trying to change." She studied him, as if weighing the authenticity of his words. "Change isn't easy," she said softly. "It's painful, but it's better than staying trapped in old ways." He nodded again, still feeling small. "I'm sorry," he blurted quietly, "for everything." Her face remained composed. "I appreciate that. I hope you'll continue to be sorry in a way that propels you to do better. Not just for yourself, but for these kids, for the community." Thomas met her gaze for the first time in months. He expected to feel anger or resentment, but instead felt a strange sense of relief. "I'm trying," he repeated. She gave a curt nod. "Good." And with that, she turned and walked away to greet the kids, leaving Thomas standing there, feeling as though the final curtain on his old life had decisively fallen. Cynthia Braxton continued her tenure with unrelenting commitment. Over time, the Philadelphia PD saw an improvement in community relations, a modest dip in complaints of excessive force, and a gradual rise in public trust. Much of the credit was due to Cynthia's reforms and the unwavering support from Commissioner Holloway, who eventually announced his retirement, paving the way for Cynthia Braxton to become Philadelphia's first black female police commissioner. She took the oath in a modest ceremony, standing on a stage near the Philadelphia Museum of Art, a place symbolic of both the city's cultural heritage and the challenges it faces. In her acceptance speech, she spoke of unity, accountability, and the responsibility every officer has to respect the dignity of the people they serve. The applause was warm, mixed with cautious optimism from some corners, but it was a sign of Philadelphia's willingness to embrace change. Meanwhile, Thomas Harding spent years grappling with the fallout of his actions. He never regained a career in law enforcement. Instead, after completing his counseling and community service, he managed to get part-time security gigs. Eventually, he found a job in a warehouse, operating forklifts, working quietly to piece together a life overshadowed by regret. He sent money to Rachel for child support, though she never tried to rekindle their relationship. He had visitation rights with Lily, who grew into a thoughtful teenager, well aware of her father's flaws, but still loving him in her own cautious way. She asked him tough questions about race, policing, and fairness, forcing him to confront his old ideologies. Each time he found himself lecturing a child at the community center or talking to Lily about respecting others, he felt the sting of his own hypocrisy. But the pain became a catalyst for genuine transformation. Over the years, Thomas slowly, agonizingly, shed the layers of hatred and ignorance he'd carried for so long. Thomas spent a decade quietly contributing to community efforts, volunteering time to speak about the dangers of prejudice, the toxic mix of fear and power. He never again wore a badge. Sometimes he thought about what might have been if he had recognized his biases earlier, if he had listened to his partner Mike, or if he'd known that the woman he struck was about to become his boss. A form of personal redemption came when he reached out to a city-wide support group aimed at bridging gaps between the community and former officers who'd left the force under troubled circumstances. He found solace, among others, who had made grave mistakes and were now trying to atone, offering apologies and restitution in whatever ways they could. Still, the karma that struck him remained clear and unyielding. He had lost his dream, his marriage, his standing in the community, all because he allowed racism and anger to direct his hand. The weight of that consequence never left him, and that was part of the lesson. Some mistakes can't be undone, only learned from over and over. If there was any solace, it was in knowing his story served as a cautionary tale. New recruits heard about the ex-officer who lost everything because he couldn't see past his own prejudice. Community leaders invoked his name when discussing accountability. He had become, in effect, a living reminder that the line between protecting and harming is razor-thin, defined by choice and character. Philadelphia moved on. Its neighborhoods continued to evolve, gentrify, clash, and find unity in unexpected places. Community centers flourished under expanded police youth programs. The city embraced cultural festivals, celebrating the mosaic of people who called it home. The Eagles won and lost in seasons that tested the loyalty of even the most faithful fans, but that was Philly for you. Commissioner Cynthia Braxton oversaw the department with a balance of discipline and empathy. She didn't solve every issue, no one could, but she set the Philadelphia PD on a more transparent and equitable course. Her presence, her personal story, and her unwavering commitment to justice became a beacon for young officers who believed in a new approach to law enforcement. And in some small, quiet corner of the city, Thomas Harding carried on, no longer able to represent the law, but hopefully representing a lesson that the law and the people it serves deserves better than what he once was. This tumultuous saga of a once proud officer whose unchecked prejudice led him to strike a woman far more powerful and far more principled than he could have ever imagined has finally reached its conclusion. In a single moment, Thomas Harding lost his badge, his family, and his freedom, shattering the illusions he clung to for so long. Meanwhile, Cynthia Braxton rose to become the beacon of change the Philadelphia PD so desperately needed, transforming a department and inspiring an entire community. This story stands as a stark reminder that when hatred and fear fuel our choices, the consequences can be devastating. It also serves as an enduring testament to the power of accountability and reform. If you found this story gripping and want to see more tales of real struggles, lessons learned, and powerful transformations, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter. Thank you for watching.